Well, today, the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission is hosting a briefing on enforced disappearances in Bangladesh. We have 5 panelists to discuss this serious topic. I will briefly introduce the panelists. The panelists will speak for approximately 5 minutes. Following their presentations, we'll have a Q&A session, so please submit your questions. And panelists, please remember to mute and unmute yourself as appropriate. Okay, first off, we have Maneeksha Ganguly, who is the South Asia Director at Human Rights Watch, overseeing the organization's work in the region. Before taking over as South Asia Director in 2010, she served as Human Rights Watch's South Asia researcher. Ganguly has worked on a broad range of issues, including police reform, sexual violence, discrimination based on religion or caste, freedom of expression, and armed conflict. Prior to joining Human Rights Watch, Ganguly served as the South Asia correspondent for Time magazine, covering Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Ganguly has a master's in sociology from the Delhi School of Economics. Shahidul Alam is a Bangladeshi photographer and social justice advocate who seeks to portray those who have disappeared or been killed. He was arrested and jailed in 2018 after criticizing the government's violent response to student demonstrations against unsafe traffic conditions. His arrest ignited a widespread campaign to win his freedom, and after 107 days in confinement, he was released. Shahidul Islam is the sister of a disappeared opposition political leader, Shahidul Islam, and founder of Maradak, Mother's Call, an organization that brings together the families of victims of enforced disappearances. Islam's brother, Shahidul Islam, was picked up by Bangladeshi law enforcement in 2013 and has not been seen since. Suman was a well-known local leader of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Mohammed Ashrafusman is a liaison officer for the Hong Kong-based Asia Human Rights Commission, Asian Legal Resource Center, where he has worked since 2007. The Asian Human Rights Commission was an initiative undertaken after the Christian Conference of Asia to retain dialogue and address issues of human rights in Asia. And Angelita Barnes is the Vice President of International Advocacy and Litigation for Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. She serves as a lead attorney in many cases before the Inter-American System of Human Rights, including cases of freedom of expression, enforced disappearances of human rights defenders, and violence against women in the Americas. Before joining Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights in 2014, she served as the United Nations Political Affairs Officer in the Americas Division, worked as a human rights officer in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and served as the coordinator of the Office of the Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. Angelita is also an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University. With those introductions, I'd like to turn to Maneeksha Ganguly to start us off. Maneeksha.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for inviting Human Rights Watch to speak here today. It's very important that Lantos Commission is focusing on the human rights situation in Bangladesh. Successive governments have, over the decades, been responsible for serious human rights violations, in particular extrajudicial executions disguised as deaths due to crossfire. However, the situation today for activists, journalists, members of civil society, or the political opposition has become much, much more challenging. My briefing today will be limited to presenting our recent report on enforced disappearances, because our Bangladeshi colleagues will have much more to say in detail about the situation in their country. The Human Rights Watch report that was released last month is based on over 115 interviews with victims, their family members, and witnesses. It finds that Bangladesh authorities consistently refuse to investigate enforced disappearances and to hold those responsible accountable. Human Rights Watch found that the authorities use enforced disappearances and the threat of enforced disappearances to silence critics, chilling free speech. As I mentioned initially, although security forces in Bangladesh have long committed grave human rights violations under previous governments, enforced disappearances in particular have become the hallmark of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's rule since 2009. This is the Awami League-led government's third consecutive term, the product of a deeply flawed electoral process marked by violence, corruption, vote fraud, and other abuses. According to Bangladeshi human rights groups, nearly 600 people have been forcibly disappeared by security forces since Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina took office in 2009. Enforced disappearances have spiked around the elections of 2014 and 2018. You will hear from Sanjida about her brother who disappeared ahead of the 2014 election. Of the 600 or so victims since 2009, many have been released or been produced in courts after weeks or months of secret detention. Others have become victims of extrajudicial killings, often known as crossfire in Bangladesh, or security forces have said that they were killed during gunfights. In our report, we documented 86 cases where those forcibly disappeared are still missing from the 600. Many of the victims were critics or political opponents of the ruling Awami League government. Because the government denies these cases, alongside this report, Human Rights Watch has created a web page tracking and profiling these 86 cases. We will update when the authorities provide information about these individuals. Awami League leaders and Bangladeshi authorities often mock victims and routinely obstruct investigations, making clear that the government has no intention of meaningfully addressing enforced disappearances by security forces. The government has repeated its allegations in responding to our report. The Bangladesh authorities have also written to the Lantos Commission ahead of this meeting, presenting these same denials and claiming that there is an obvious intention of managing the government. In his letter to the Commission, the Bangladesh ambassador has said that the victims of so-called enforced disappearances often reappear. As I mentioned earlier, we too have documented cases where people were either released after weeks, months, days of illegal detention, often too disoriented or too scared to speak. Some were also produced in court. But which is why I think it's very important, because Bangladesh seems to be confused about this issue, that I would like to reiterate that under international law, an enforced disappearance is considered to be the arrest, detention, abduction, or any other form of deprivation of liberty by agents of the state or by persons or groups acting on behalf of the state, followed by a refusal to acknowledge the detention and concealing of the fate or whereabouts of the disappeared person, which places such a person outside of the protection of the law. These 86 people that we speak of are still outside the protection of the law. The 600 that we mentioned were, for various periods of time, outside the protection of the law when they had been picked up by security forces. The government letter has also spoken about miscreants who were disguised as law enforcement officials, including members of RAB. They talk about numerous cases where such people have been brought to justice. However, what it does not do is to shed light on those people that are disappeared and those that whose families are still waiting for answers. Critics of the government continue to live in fear of being forcibly disappeared, and families of the disappeared have little hope of getting justice from this government. We therefore believe that the United States and other concerned governments should impose targeted sanctions against top security force commanders and other officials implicated in forced disappearances and other grave abuses. More enforced disappearances in Bangladesh have been linked to the notoriously abusive Rapid Action Battalion, RAB, as the death squad. And the Human Rights Watch has often called RAB a death squad, as have others. And we have repeatedly said that it should be disbanded. Since RAB is made up, however, of officers seconded from the police and the military, many of its abusive practices have now been replicated in other units. So we have also documented cases where the detective branch of the police, or the DJFI, which is the military intelligence wing, have also been named by witnesses or by family members. In October 2020, US senators published a letter calling for the individual sanctions against top RAB officials for extrajudicial executions, enforced disappearances, and torture under the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. Imposing sanctions on high-level officials implicated in enforced disappearances could prompt the resolution of cases, spur accountability, and deter future abuses. Bangladesh is the top contributor of peacekeeping troops around the world. We also believe there needs to be increased scrutiny of officials particularly those that have served in RAB, to ensure that those implicated in grave human rights violations do not have the honor to serve under the UN flag. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shahidul Alam.
Thank you for having me. I know what happens from personal experience. I was picked up from where I am right now on the 5th of August 2018. It was deep in the night. I was handcuffed, blindfolded, dragged away. There was no mention of why I was being taken, where I was being taken. My laptop, my mobile devices were also taken away. The building security cameras were taped up. The hard disk taken away. I had no opportunity to book my lawyer. It was only because I kicked and screamed and resisted that my family and friends who were nearby were able to know I was being taken away. Only gangsters do this. Is this the way the state is meant to behave? Though they had direct involvement, the police denied any knowledge of the incident. They refused to record the complaint letter, which we call the GD or General Diary, which the court has decreed that they must do. My family was not informed of my whereabouts. It was only because my family was able to find out independently where I was being tortured that they surrounded the place and kept an all-night vigil. Their presence and the international exposure I received is probably why I'm alive today. The judge in court told my family, consider yourself lucky he wasn't disappeared. I bring this up because the reason many people are disappeared, as Manisha said, because they're dissenters, opposition activists, people who try and exercise their freedom of expression. This is a constitutional right, but those exercising it get arrested under the Digital Security Act, or crossfired, or disappeared. Yesterday was the International Day of the Victims of Enforced Disappearances. The families were present yesterday in a protest organized by MIDUC, the organization that my other speaker founded, the Call of the Mothers. It was at the National Press Club. I was there. The government's primary accountability is to speak. The government has written a letter to the Lantos Commission, which is fine, in response to this virtual briefing. But why are they not responding to these families? It was a widely advertised event. There were mothers, sisters, children crying their hearts out because they wanted their loved ones back. These are ordinary people who feel they've been wrong, reaching out to their government for help. People from all walks of life were there. Why was the government not there listening, giving them answers? If they really had nothing to do with the disappearances, they should have been responding to the needs of their citizens, being with them at their time of need. Why is not a single case being investigated? The government's letter talks of impersonation. There were scores of witnesses, eyewitnesses yesterday, who talked of RAB in uniform with RAB vehicles coming to pick up victims. What credibility does the government have if impersonations can operate with such blatancy? They come in an armed convoy in vehicles with official markings, full of uniformed people, and pick someone up. If today someone can impersonate RAB so easily, tomorrow they will impersonate the government. What confidence can people have in a government that allows this to happen? A police force that has the ability to pick up a juvenile in a remote village for sharing a Facebook post is clueless when an armed uniformed convoy picks up someone from his home. You really expect us to believe that? And if that were true, there should have been a countrywide manhunt for the imposters. Instead, we have denials. The letter to Lantos Commission is yet another denial. The idea that if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it, except that the families bear witness. The families who were there all knew. An entire nation bears witness. had the government been what they claimed to be, they would have the guts to hold a fair election. They would have faced the public. They would have responded to the complaints with genuine concern. Appeasing the international community with meaningless pledges while ignoring the pleas of its own people cannot be the response of a legitimate government. But then, do we have a legitimate government is a question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn to Shahidul Alam. Thank you.
Thank you for giving. Can you hear me? Am I clear to you? Right. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk in front of you all and then raise our voice here because I'm representing not only Shahidul Alam's sister as a victim of enforced disappearance in Bangladesh. I'm actually representing my DAC, who are a number of families where we stand together now in these Bangladesh circumstances. And I would like to tell about my brother's case where there were plenty of eyewitnesses. He was a General Secretary of Bangladesh National Party in 25 number ward in Tejghat, Dhaka. And he was abducted by the RAB 1 force on 2013, 4th of December at night, like 8:30. And the place he was taken from is Bashundhara residential area and I block and road number 4. On that particular plot, there were so many laborers and workers working on that time particularly, and they have seen, and the caretaker was also there, and in front of them there were 2 RAB vehicles, cover vans with the RAB uniform and arms, and one white color microbus came, and they with Shumon, my brother Shahidul Shumon, there were 5 other persons. They were having their evening there. On that particular time, in front of the eyewitnesses, RAB 1 forces picked them from there. They binded their eyes and then they took them brutally to the cover van and took them to RAB 1 headquarters. As soon as we get the information, my mother, my elder sister, all my family members, they went to the RAB office and they want to know why they have picked them. From that first time, they started denying that they have not done that operation and then such kind of operation never happened. But in front of the eyewitnesses, 6 persons cannot be vanished, and then with the uniform and then with that armed forces and with the double power van mentioning RAB 1. It lies to them if they have not done that with the complaint, with the applications we have submitted to them to find out who have done that then. So as we have not received any answer or they were continuously denying, we went to the police station to file a general diary. Police never accepted that. And not even the any cases. As we wanted to mention, RAB actually picked them, and RAB 1 was arrested them, and then they picked them to the RAB 1 headquarters. Later on, it was repeatedly from 2013 till next couple of years. My family always submitted the applications to find them, to have an investigation for our brothers. All these victims for our brothers, to all the law enforcement agencies, including the Home Ministry, DGFI, SB, and RAB headquarters, everywhere, and IG of police. But nobody has done any of the investigation till now. We are now 2021. Till now, there is no investigation done. In the meantime, what we have done from our family, we have done a High Court writ in 2016, where we got a rule where it was advised to show to the High Court that why RAB abducted them and why they are not showed to the families. So, but there was no hearing after that from the High Court, from the government side. It is still hanging. It is there. And with the time, we were doing the campaigns and press conferences because nobody was saying anything inside the country. Nobody can talk. So when we started standing in the road with the human chain and press conferences, we have seen there are so many other families also who are facing the same, who have not seen their son, who have not seen their brother or their husband for couple of years. And then it was massively happened just before the election 2014 in 5th January happened. Just before that, the number is really massive. In Dhaka, there were 19 cases which was highlighted, including my brother's one on that particular time. Till now, we don't have any information about them. There is no investigation from the police. Rather, the families were harassed by the local polices several times, or all the families. We raised the case to the working group of UN, and we have submitted all the documents, and they have testified us. And there were later from the UN working group to the government, Home Ministry, that to know about all the victims who were disappeared and who were picked up by the law enforcement agencies. Later on, we have communicated because it was we are not finding my brother, and then that's why my family members and everyone, we went to the RAB head office and who were in charge then, the CEO of RAB 1, the ADG, and then who was the intelligence director. We talked with all of them personally. And they were saying that they are searching for it, they're looking for it. Even individually, the RAB official came and told that to my mother that Shumon and others were in their custody, and the headquarters, they given a direct instruction. And then with the ADG's instruction, they were taken from RAB 1 CEO's custody. So it was, we know all their names. The CEO was Kismat Hadder, and the ADG was Ziaul Hassan. We have said and done that, read with the names mentioned. It is very much clear, but nobody is investigating anything. Nobody is checking why these names are coming and why these people have done this. And till now, it's 7.5 years. These persons are disappeared. It's not only the 19% just before the election in Dhaka. It is a number, if we say now, it is more than 550 listed number. We don't know how many people is with, we don't know how many people they have under judicial killing and other enforced disappearances, which we don't know. We could not list them. But the list says it is almost like 550 numbers, which is a massive number. And it lies to the government to answer why these people are, because it scares us, the families, to us, because they have released few people when they have abducted, like Shahidul Alam just say how they have treated them. There are some other cases, some other persons also who came after 10 days, 15 days, 15 months. So when we hear from them, how they were kept in the underground cell, how they were tortured, and it really scares us. I want my brother to be alive. I never think that anything happens, because he was not a criminal, and the persons who were with them, they were not criminal. They were just a supporter of opposition party. So it's not a criminal, and nobody is beyond the law. There should be some clarification, investigation, and that should be asked by the government and law enforcement agencies, because it lies to them. The responsibility lies to the government to clarify us, investigate, and find out where these people are. Are they alive, or why they were taken by the law enforcement agencies, and why they are kept there till 7.5 years without any information illegally. So that's where we are, and we want everyone's help actually to raise it to the government and find out the answer, because till now, as UN, Human Rights Watch, other working groups and human rights, all the organizations, local ones also, Udikar and other, everyone is highlighting and raising this, but there is no reply and no answer, and repeatedly denial on these cases. So I will request to have any reply, or there should be an investigation, because there are particular person on that particular time when the law enforcement agencies have taken them, and who were the responsible persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mohammed Ashrafusman, floor is yours.
Mr. Bruce Fawn, I thank you and the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission of the United States Congress for this opportunity to brief about the grave impact of the ongoing enforced disappearances in Bangladesh. Enforced disappearances are taking place in Bangladesh with blanket impunity as an integral part of the state's policy of the incumbent Sheikh Hasina government. This is a crime against humanity as defined in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The government of Bangladesh disregards the calls made by the independent human rights experts of the United Nations. The UN Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances repeatedly urged for credible investigation and prosecution of the perpetrators of enforced disappearances, which the government has trashed. At the UN Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review and the Treaty Bodies Review sessions, the state officials denied the occurrence of enforced disappearances. Incumbent Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, as the head of the government, officially defends her government's policy of disappearing people. Hasina, in one of her parliamentary speeches, justified enforced disappearances and claimed that the United States and the United Kingdom commit enforced disappearances. The government defends and denies that the crimes takes place in Bangladesh and continues silencing the dissidents. These publicly exposed governmental positions keep empowering the perpetrators, especially the security forces, the Rapid Action Battalion, the detective branch and the counterterrorism unit of the Bangladesh Police, and the Directorate General of Forces Intelligence, who consistently commit enforced disappearances with impunity. These forces also maintain online and offline surveillance that leads to direct intimidations, threats, and harassments to the surviving families of the disappeared victims. The government of Bangladesh has created an entrenched fear psychosis in the society as a whole. Bangladesh's criminal justice system not only abdicates its constitutional power to administer justice, it is, in fact, incapable of holding the perpetrators accountable. We must understand that the survivors of gross human rights violations, such as enforced disappearances, do not have universal access to the complaint mechanism, mostly controlled by the police. Since 2009, amongst the hundreds of disappearances, very few were allowed to be registered. A judicial officer had so far probed only one case following a habeas corpus petition filed with the High Court Division of the Supreme Court. The judicial probe report concluded that the police were responsible for disappearing a homeopathic practitioner. The High Court Division officially received the probe report in July 2017, yet none of the perpetrators has been held accountable. The diplomats representing the Bangladesh government, such as the ambassador to the United States, claim that the regime has investigated the matters with due seriousness. In order to substantiate this claim, can the Bangladesh government submit a set of credible criminal investigation reports on the cases of enforced disappearances to the co-chairs of this commission within next 24 hours? The truth is, the possibility for the surviving families to get justice from Bangladesh's domestic justice mechanism is exhausted. The Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission of the United States Congress can comprehensively value this information and go for fact checks through its own capacities. In order to make the people's life peaceful and normal, the mastermind, the officials having the command responsibilities, and the perpetrators must be held accountable. Mr. Moderator and the co-chairs, I believe that the members of this commission will promptly initiate action-oriented legal approaches in accordance with the Commission's mandate to demonstrate the commitment to promote, defend, and advocate internationally recognized human rights norms reflecting the role and responsibilities of the United States Congress. I look forward to the questions you may ask for further clarification. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And before we go on to Angelita, I would like to acknowledge that a member of the Lantos Commission, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, is in attendance. Angelita?
Thank you so much, and good morning. You have all heard the interventions of my co-panelists, direct testimonies of some of the horrible abuses that people in Bangladesh, particularly those that do not agree with the ruling power, are suffering. And the accounts you have heard about today are only a small fraction of what is happening on the ground. The government of Bangladesh has been warned time and time again about the excesses of its security forces, about the scale and even systematic nature of its human rights abuses, the scale and clear intentionality of the repression, as well as the near absolute impunity in which such abuses remain. In fact, the lack of independent and transparent investigations and effective prosecutions through the judicial system demonstrates that the government of Bangladesh is unwilling to hold perpetrators accountable. The government of Bangladesh has heard from local civil society organizations, and instead of listening, it has sought to silence them using every tool at its disposal to do so, including the application of the draconian 2018 Digital Security Act. International civil society organizations have also documented and denounced for years the seriousness of the human rights situation. And some of them, like Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, where I work, have even tried to engage the Bangladeshi authorities, only to find a categorical denial of such a serious state of affairs in the country. But it is not only civil society speaking out and raising the alarm. United Nations experts, including the Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearance and the Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial, Summary, or Arbitrary Executions, among others, have publicly expressed their concern about serious human rights abuses in Bangladesh. And the Committee Against Torture even called for an independent inquiry into allegations of grave abuses by the Rapid Action Battalion. The US State Department has also reflected many of these concerns in its annual reports on human rights for several years now. And yet there is no improvement. On the contrary, the crackdown on dissent and the number of documented cases of enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, and instances of torture, among other serious human rights abuses, is on the rise, with less and less space for civil society to operate, for journalists to freely report, and for Bangladeshis more generally to be critical. So the question is, what can the international community do? What can the United States do? As the recently published Human Rights Watch report on enforced disappearances in Bangladesh recommends, and given the limited accountability tools that are out there vis-a-vis Bangladesh, there are a series of measures that should be considered by the US government, including a review of its relationship with Bangladeshi security forces, a strong call for particularly problematic forces and units, such as the Rapid Action Battalion, to be dismantled and at minimum to be barred from participating in international peacekeeping missions. And very importantly, the US government should use targeted sanctions on high-ranking officials with command responsibility for enforced disappearances and other serious abuses such as extrajudicial killings and torture. We believe that in the absence of other effective accountability mechanisms, the adoption of targeted sanctions under the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act and other targeted sanctions regulations could positively influence the behavior of state authorities in Bangladesh. Sanctions are a critical and a powerful tool to spur much needed reform and stop the abuses by naming and shaming perpetrators, restricting their US visas, and freezing their assets in the US. Individual targeted sanctions will advance accountability for serious human rights abuses. Sanctions will advance as well United States' interest in the context of its relationship with Bangladesh, especially considering that the United States has and continues to invest heavily in Bangladesh as a regional ally, particularly since 2016 in the fight against extremism. The US provides Bangladesh with generous foreign assistance totaling more than $200 million annually, which includes funding for international security assistance. And Bangladesh also receives support from the Department of State's Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program. It is therefore possible, and indeed very likely, that these funding sources are being used to provide support or training to forces such as the Rapid Action Battalion, which, as exposed today, are implicated in serious and numerous human rights abuses. Targeted sanctions are an important tool, again, to spur behavior change from the inside. And designating specific individuals with high-ranking positions and command responsibility for sanctions would send a very clear message, a very direct message to the government of Bangladesh that the United States does not and will not tolerate egregious human rights abuses from its allies and regional security partners. It also signals clear behavior modifications that must be made by actors within Bangladesh to come into alignment with international norms and American legal standards regarding human rights, or risk damaging its strategic partnership with the United States. Moreover, it will send a message to other United States allies perpetrating similar patterns of abuse that they cannot buy silence under human rights track record and American financial assistance by cooperating with the US on counterterrorism efforts. This is a time to pass targeted sanctions to push for serious reform and deter further deterioration of the human rights situation in Bangladesh as the country prepares for elections in 2023, setting the tone of US expectations of its ally going forward. Many thanks, and I remain at your disposal for any questions or comments.
Thank you very much for that. Now we'll turn to the questions. This first question, you've largely addressed already, Angelita, but I wanted to give the others also a chance to weigh in on it. It reads, Bangladesh Authority needs end the environment of fear and culture of impunity. The UN and other UN member states need to launch international tribunals and investigations against the Bangladesh regime and its continuous crime against humanity. UN needs to ban Bangladesh forces who have been involved in UN human rights violations from UN peacekeeping missions. Sanctions regimes should impose targeted sanctions on Bangladesh ruling leaders and government officials to avoid any future conflict and crisis. Global fragile states, task force, UN, US, and international community, global leaders and rights groups need to work together to bring peace and stability and create an atmosphere of free, fair, and neutral elections. So, Angelita, feel free to expand on your comments, but I'd like to invite the other panelists to weigh in as well.
Do you want it to direct it to anyone in particular? You're muted. You're muted, Bruce.
Go ahead, Shahidul.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I wanted to give you all an opportunity to weigh in on that.
Okay, just because no one else is speaking. I mean, no, largely, of course, I think that is necessary. Absolutely. But let's just look at the chat. It's interesting looking at the chat to see how much spamming there is on that chat with almost identical messages coming about. This is the way it's being done. I mean, the government has all these resources. So you have the trolls, you have the bots, you have these chats being blocked like this. Not only are they not listening or allowing people to speak, whereas now we have a platform where some people can speak, even those situations are being taken up in this manner. I mean, that letter to the Lantos Commission was a ridiculous letter. It's a joke. It's not actually addressed a single of those incidents. I'm perfectly happy and willing to accept that there may well be mistakes in there. I'd like specific answers, not this wool that keeps coming out by a propaganda machinery. And at some point, I mean, at this point, I'm not sure where Muhammad Ashrafusman is, but I salute someone like Shahidul Alam for having the guts to speak out in this situation, because people in Bangladesh who are speaking out are taking a huge amount of risks, as I did earlier on, and I'm continuing to speak out. So you've actually got a lot of people who are extremely vulnerable, in a repressive regime and a climate of fear, even then, venturing to speak out like this, yet you've got this repressive regime which is working in abandon.
Thank you. Anyone else, or should I move on to the next question? I'll move on. Bangladesh police and detective branch are also allegedly responsible for forced disappearances and staged gunfights. Would you shed some light on these agencies' involvement as well? I believe Mohammed Ashrafusman, I believe you discussed some of the other groups in addition to the Rapid Action Battalion. Do you want to address this question?
Thank you very much, Bruce. Of course, Bangladesh Police is an agency that commits the second highest number of enforced disappearances according to the figures of the 600 plus enforced disappearances. Rapid Action Battalion comes first, and then the second figure that we have among the documented cases is the detective branch of the Bangladesh Police. So, as all the speakers have already mentioned, that they operate under blanket impunity. So we need to understand that since the process of recruitment, their promotion, their posting with different capacities, everything is done in a sophisticated way, which is absolutely unprofessional way, and not on merit, not on law enforcement professionalism. It's rather serving one particular party in the office, and that is the ultimate objective for the government, to use the law enforcement agencies to commit the crimes wearing the uniform of the state so that the society can be silenced. And that is what's happening in Bangladesh. And I can tell you, my friend Shahidul Alam, he might have said it, that the person who abducted him got a gallantry award from the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina for abducting and arresting him. It is recorded according the police, the official publication that claimed it, that somebody who led the operation was rewarded for that. So Bangladesh is a country like that. If you want to hear more, the former police chief who rigged the election in 2018 and in 2014, they were made ambassadors of Bangladesh in abroad. So that helps us to understand how is the situation. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Some of the questions are addressing why does the government engage in these enforced disappearances. I think we could also add the torture and the crossfire killings to that. And if I'm not mistaken, the Rapid Action Battalion was set up under the previous government, the government previous to Sheikh Hasina. So I would add the question, is this a structural problem that any political government will likely use to its advantage, or is it one particular to the Hasina government in your view? Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, I'll respond to that. It's a perfectly valid point. And in fact, when people talk of regime change, I look at the question and think it's a wrong question, because really, if this is the process, if the mechanism is such, when every institution has been destroyed, when the police is used as a private army, when the judiciary is not separated, when the bureaucracy again only serves to support the ruling party, it doesn't matter who's in power. We will have this situation all the time. So what we need really is a change in the process, a change in the mechanism. And the first way to do it is to actually have a free and fair election. I mean, at this point in time, we've got a situation where the government actually doesn't need our vote. They can just keep on winning elections ad infinitum. And unless there is a mechanism where the government is made accountable, I don't really care which government it is. They will all behave in the same manner. The sad thing is it's gone from one better to worse. And I have questioned the Irshad government when it was there. I've questioned the BNP government when it was there. I'm questioning the Army League government now that it's here. The problem is, with the Army League government having been here for so long, they just built on this, and it's now come to a stage where it's simply unbearable.
Another one of the questions asserts that Bangladesh is becoming a one-party state, which speaks to your point about the need for free and fair elections. So is the solution to this problem a political one, that more needs to be done to move Bangladesh to freer and fair elections and a more open democratic system?
I can take that. Thank you. So, I mean, a bulk of the questions that have come up is to do with the sort of the motive, perhaps, behind what's happening, and that links to the present question as well. And the issue really is that the 2014 and the 2018 elections were both complicated, both by international community deemed unfair. In the 2014 election, the opposition boycotted. So basically, the Awami League was most of the seats were uncontested. In the 2018 elections, there were a series of voter intimidation and candidate intimidation. It was not the EU, the US. I think the previous administration even wrote a letter saying that this election was not fair. So when there is a stolen election in some ways, what it requires is the cooperation of the security forces to conduct this whole thing. And that has led to a security force that is now almost unchallenged. The government rewards, as many of the other people have said, those that promote its own the state agenda. There is no accountability. There is no parliament that an effective parliament that can question the government actions. And in all of this, the one thing that we really need to consider, and again, because of the sort of spate of messages that are in the chat, just to say that, yes, Bangladesh has always had a polarized political environment, but people seem to forget that every government commits abuses. When they commit abuses, it is for the civil society to try and flag those, to raise those. This particular government, this particular party, the Awami League party itself came into power opposing a general earlier, martial law earlier, and they do use the same methods of protest and seeking sort of discourse, a democratic circumstance. So therefore, to now shut down criticism in this way, and we have seen this in numerous ways. The cartoonist Kishore, who was disappeared for several days. The reason we know about that is because writer Mushtaq Ahmed, who was picked up with him, later died in custody, and which is when Kishore was released, and he could speak about the kind of torture that both these men had endured. This level of anxiety and repression of any form of criticism. These were two men that had criticized the COVID-19 response, which frankly, all over the world, civil society was doing at that point of time because no state was ready to respond properly. But Bangladesh was so anxious about it that they locked up a whole bunch of people for criticizing the government response. So therefore, there is this state, a state that is anxious, refusing to put up with any kind of dissent, and a security force that has now become so encouraged by the impunity and the rewards that it's received, that often perhaps they even act on their own. The fear is really that this is a security force that has gone out of control. And that leads me to RAB. RAB was indeed set up in 2004. It was set up after 9/11 in a way to try and let Bangladesh deal with the sort of war on terror that was occurring at that time. And it was because it was believed that Bangladesh did not have a force capable of handling it. The US, UK, and many other governments helped Bangladesh create the Rapid Action Battalion. Soon after, because of the abuses that actually occurred under the previous government, crossfires became the norm under the previous BNP-led government, at which point the US began to express concerns. UK stopped training. And since then has been this continuous sort of level of abuses that we've been raising and concerns about, which now lead us to believe that rap should be disbanded. It should not exist because it is a force that operates in a way where there is no accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to recognize Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who I believe would like to ask a question.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. This has been a very productive session this morning. And tragically and sadly, it appears to be a continuing plight for the freedom-loving people of Bangladesh. My last experience was Bangladesh being at its border, dealing with victims of human trafficking. I'd hoped that as time went on, that there would be a love for democracy and governments would respect the fact that they were elected by people who did desire freedom. I do want to make a note of the fact of one of the witnesses indicating the various bots and other breaches of the chat line. And I want to say to all of those engaged in that kind of distracting and vile activity, primarily because people should hear the truth, is that the truth is going to prevail, and we have heard the truth. And once you are being heard by the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, our very mission is to continue to be truthful and to expose the violations of human rights around the world. And so Bangladesh has already been exposed, and however you choose to undermine it, it cannot be undermined. We have heard it. I have heard it. I know my commission members will certainly be responsive to what we have heard or what reports we will get. I want to ask the question, and it would be helpful for the just a recounting a little bit of the witness whose brother was taken, and do we know, are there places where these individuals disappeared to? Are there prisons, places that may contain them? Is that known, or is the disappearance just as one would accept or understand the word disappeared? What kind of help can we give to the civil society and the human rights organizations? That's the second question. And if someone could expand more on the idea of the Bangladesh military not being utilized in UN security force effort. I think that is interesting. And I think the United Nations should be more actively engaged. Maybe they are, but how we can be of assistance, meaning the US and the Commission on these matters. Thank you so very much for your brave testimony and very insightful testimony. I've given these questions to whoever chooses to answer them. And if you would just identify yourself when you are answering. Thank you so very much for having me this morning.
Thank you. Who would like to take a stab at that?
I think Sanjita should, regarding her brother.
Right. Yes. The main point, what I wanted to know to answer all those questions and just to clarify why there is repeatedly denial if the government is not liable, if the law enforcement agencies are not actually taking any responsibility, accountability. What is the reason behind that? Why we're not investigating that? It is a state's responsibility to find out where their general public rights are, and then if it is safe or if people cannot leave, the general people, not regardless to whatever the government is, whoever the political parties are in government place or opposition place, it lies to everyone to protect the right to let them live and have them the freedom to live their life. So why there is repeated denial, 7.5 years, and why we knowing that there were that particular law enforcement agencies, there was no investigation, nobody was charging them, and why there was no progress. So I think on that particular point, we can also ask to the government why whenever it was repeatedly asked from any of the human rights organization, UN or Human Rights Watch or any of the local human rights organization, why there was repeated denial, why there was totally quiet, no answer on those. So this indicates where we are having our basic rights to live here in Bangladesh. As Shahidul Alam already said that we cannot even say that against government who are doing repeatedly all these disappearances and judicial killing. There are very rare people actually who are raising that one. So when we stood against them, we have seen there are families coming to support us and coming standing beside us. So I think that denial, they should have that accountability. If there is an elite force formed to excel their performance, whereas they are utilizing that to keep that power, and then with that those disappearances and abduction. So I think those denial, and then why they are not, there is no investigation. I think we can focus on that particular point and have that answer from the government. It lies to the state agencies' responsibility to give that right to the general public for to live, to have their life.
If I may, what did your brother do? What did he do in Bangladesh?
Yeah, he was just an opposition political party leader, and he was a businessman. He had 2 kids and wife and the family. So the only reason why they have abducted, it was, as I have mentioned before, it was just before the election of 2014, 5th of January election. Just before that, there were massive number of abductions by the law enforcement agencies here in Bangladesh. My brother's case is one of them, and he was the really active organizer and general secretary for Bangladesh National Party in our local area, 25th number ward in Dhaka. So I think that cannot be a reason a person to pick them and abduct them and keep them undergrounded for 7.5 years, and we don't even know them. My brother is alive or not. There is no investigation. There is nobody replied from the government side on that.
Thank you. Are there other answers to my questions?
Yes, if I may. Thank you, Sheila. You asked very specific questions, and it's a difficult one to answer, of course, because this information is not readily available. I know in my case where I was kept once I was picked up. But that's personal experience. Part of what happens is the people, of course, those people who've disappeared have disappeared. So there's no one to tell you. In the rare cases when people turn up, they stay silent. And in fact, that was what happened in my case as well. While after I was tortured, they made a deal. They offered a deal that I could be let free. All records would be expunged, provided I kept quiet. And it was because it was when I refused that deal that then I was taken to court, to remand, and eventually spent in jail. But to go further, there have been torture cells found in pretty much every university campus. Recently, there was the son of an MP found who was beating up someone, and when they searched his house, they found a torture cell in his house. And yet this man roams around free. So this is just so prevalent at the moment that it's very difficult to pin down. In terms of what you say regarding the United Nations action, of course, these are actions that need to be taking place. But there, I will say, this situation of repression and tyrants is something that is global. It's sure Bangladesh is being affected by it now, but I think we need to recognize that this is a global phenomenon, and the UN needs to take an action at a global level to prevent such things from happening. And certainly it should stop in Bangladesh, but illegal wars, occupation, drone attacks, all of those are things that need to stop if this world is to be a better place.
And if I may, respond this last question about the contribution of Bangladeshi troops to peacekeeping operations. The main concern that we share with many groups is that Bangladesh is the top contributor of troops to peacekeeping operations globally. And with this track record of abuses, particularly from members of the Rapid Action Battalion, the fact that they continue to be deployed in peacekeeping missions around the world is extremely concerning. And so one of the big asks, and where we believe the US could play a very important leadership role, is to make sure that the vetting policy at the UN is improved, is strengthened, to make sure first that officers that have participated in the Rapid Action Battalion are not allowed to be part of peacekeeping missions, but also more broadly that the policies for vetting officials is really strengthened to make sure that there is no way to replicate the abuses that continue happening at home in other parts of the world from members of the Bangladeshi security forces and military. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're coming to the end here, but I want to give everybody an opportunity to make a closing comment if they'd like. And I would invite you to also include a recap. Some of you have already given ideas about how influence can be brought to bear to help resolve this problem. And feel free to address that again if you like. Thank you.
Let me start. It's not a very long thing. 42 eminent citizens have put together a statement pointing out to the irregularities of the Election Commission, and we've written to the President asking that a Supreme Judicial Council be formed to look into the work of the Election Commission. This was many, many months ago. Then we provided further evidence. We've never had a response. I think the first step would be to have an independent election commission which had the spine to actually stand up to whatever regime is in place and conduct a free election. It wouldn't change things overnight, but it would begin the process towards change.
All right.
Thank you.
If I go next. All right, thank you. Few things that I have already said, that the judicial system in Bangladesh, it's absolutely collapsed. So you cannot, when you have a collapsed criminal justice mechanism in place, and then you cannot expect any accountability of any sort, regardless of their ranks and files. So in the case of Bangladesh, whether it's an electoral fraud, or whether a human rights crime or an ordinary crime, you cannot expect justice to be administered by the system in place. So that should be everybody's priority. The next one is an unpleasant one, if I may say, is the geopolitics involving Bangladesh and its natural resources that many people want from the developed parts of the world. And if you check, you may find the companies of United States and the neighboring other big countries who, since this government came, how much of the stake they have acquired. So that plays a role. The international community remains silent in criticizing Bangladesh the way it deserves. So there are criticisms, and there are more praises than criticism for housing the Rohingya refugees, for example. When in United Nations platforms, you talk about people speaking on Bangladesh. So these are the areas that we need to be honest to our responsibilities and to our mandates when we are serious about human rights, when we are serious about people's right to get fair trial and people's right to justice. So then we have to really focus on the abuses beyond this geopolitical relationship, whether Bangladesh is coming to Quad or not, but we have to be honest to focus on the human rights issues. So that I would request the United States congressmen, women, they will also consider that part. And if they have heard the victim's voice today. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just to quickly reiterate that in terms of recommendations, to review the relationship with Bangladesh, particularly with the security forces, to strongly call for the problematic forces and units, including the Rapid Action Battalion, to be dismantled, to play a more leadership role in terms of the UN in demanding a stronger vetting process and the exclusion of officers that have served at the Rapid Action Battalion in any peacekeeping mission. And finally, the point on targeted sanctions, targeted individual sanctions as a tool that could really help spur some change within Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to add some on the last slide. Right. Thank you, Lands Commission, because in country we cannot even raise that, and we cannot ask for any justice. So my last request and will be to have justice here, and it is very hard for us, the victim families, to pass actually each day having disappeared my family member under their custody, and we don't know what is happening in their underground cell with them. So it is to pressurizing or asking to the government to clarify and go for urgent investigation as the cases were testified by the UN working group, and they have given particular clear names and which was published to the government and asked for the clarification. So I need help. I will request on behalf of all those victim families, please let us have that answer and investigation. Thank you very much for giving us that scope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Manisha?
Thank you. Thank you all. The Human Rights Watch report was called Where No Sun Can Enter. And that was actually from somebody who was held in one of these places. And he described that place as one without sunlight, which perhaps describes where a number of these people end up, so many that have not returned as yet. Shahidul mentioned the Election Commission. Zaman mentioned the judiciary. There is the National Human Rights Commission, which is not functional. To Sanjita's appeal for help, the problem in Bangladesh is that no institution right now is standing with victims. And that is why we need the support of international community to help and help very quickly. Zaman also mentioned the Rohingya, and it is true, and Bangladesh should be applauded for hosting 1 million Rohingya refugees, but that should not in any way take away from the responsibility that Bangladesh government has towards its citizens, so many of whom have these victims. And I'll end today, because Sanjit has also spoken, but I just wanted to end to remind people that enforced disappearance is really, for all of us that work on human rights violations, is one of the worst abuses, because family after family keeps telling us, either return him or give us a body. Please tell us where he is. We have mothers who keep saying, please, can you make sure that my son has medicine? We have wives that say, can you please make sure that he has a blanket? It is just the worst thing, because families keep waiting. And in answer to this, when families go to police, to leaders, to political leaders in Bangladesh, they are routinely mocked. They're told that these people have run away from bad deaths, that they are criminals who are in hiding, and worse, that they're having affairs and therefore have fled their families. So that level of mockery and unkindness and cruelty that is visited upon these families when they go seeking help is another reason why we need international intervention to press Bangladesh to reverse course. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you all very much for your insights into this distressing and serious issue. And thank you once again.